Okay, we're getting ready to start on our STEM panel. This is an important panel as we talk about the pipeline and et cetera.
Hi. What's going on?
So
Do you
we're
wanna share
very
my-
happy that we have this great panel here to talk about this, and I think this will be one of those panels where you might need a dictionary. Very smart people here. Is Sabriya here?
Yeah, hi.
Hi. How are you?
Good.
That's Dr. Stukes to you.
Hi.
To me as well.
So, Artware from DASNY is here. Good to see you, Art. He's running things up in the state. We got people from all over the place that are here. So, I'm going to turn it over to you, Miriam.
Okay.
Miriam is here because of the great Lori Davis West, who introduced us, and so we're happy
Brought
about
snacks
that.
for everybody.
And brought snacks for us.
All right, great.
So, thank you. It's on you.
My pleasure. Thank you all for being here. I want to start by sort of seeing who's in the room. So how many of you are educators, if you could raise a hand? Excellent. How many of you are scientists, if you could raise your hand? Excellent. How many of you are entrepreneurs in the room? Wonderful. And how many of you are writers? I see additional hands going up. Okay. You can raise your hand for all of the above. Anyone that I left out that you want to tell me? Yes. Policy. Excellent. Yes. Governments. Wonderful. Wonderful. I can see all of the vested interests. Oh my goodness, you should come down here. Wonderful. So I'm sure other people will join us, but it's a good for us to understand who's in the room as we embark on this really important discussion. My name is Miriam Raccah, as Clayton said. I'm the executive director of Bronx Charter School for the Arts. I've asked our panel to introduce themselves to you as if you were a room of four-year-olds. And that was really because I'm a little slow, and some of what these people do is so amazing that I was sure I wouldn't understand it. But it also helps us all to just sort of essentialize what it is we do. So I run an organization for kids who are poor to be as well educated as kids who are wealthy. And I help teachers do that, and I help teachers do that, basically. So that's me. Charisse.
Hi, everybody. I'm Charisse Taylor. I'm a director for Youth Career Connect, which is a U.S. Department of Labor grant that's housed in the New York City Department of Education in the Office of Post-Secondary Readiness. And so I do a lot of things, but the short version is that our office is working to create a domestic pipeline from high school through college for students who are interested in high-growth STEM careers. So particularly jobs that are normally outsourced to foreign employees.
All right. Hi, everyone. Can you guys hear me? All right, cool. It's weird because I can't hear myself, but you guys can hear me. I'm actually less intimidated because there aren't that many people in this room, so I'm like, hey. But I work on Teach for America staff, and I essentially manage a large fund that pushes and accelerates specific kinds of innovation. So I'll give you an example. One thing we're really interested in is broadening student outcomes outside of academic achievement. So like things like growth mindset and grit and culturally responsive teaching and things like that. So I've been in the classroom. I taught fourth grade. I was also an instructional coach. And I used a lot of tech in the classroom. And so I joined the tech team. And now I'm doing what I said earlier on the innovation strategy team. And I'm pumped to be here.
Dr. Stukes.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sabriya Stukes. I recently just got my PhD at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine in biomedical sciences. Thank you. I studied microbiology and immunology. Infectious diseases are my jam. I really love them. I'm passionately curious about how our host body, our immune system, interacts with foreign pathogens that it's never seen before. I've been very fortunate to work on some really great diseases like HIV, tuberculosis, and I did my thesis research on a disease called cryptococcosis, which actually affects lots of people in metropolitan areas. And one of the things that I started organizing while I was a grad student is an organization called Connect with STEM. I don't know how many of you were in the panel before this, but I walked in very briefly when Soraya was talking about access. And that was one of the things that I had noticed in the Bronx. I would go out to the schools. I mean, 5 miles away from our research institution, and students had no idea what a scientist was, what one looked like, how they could be one. And I found that there was just this really this huge disconnect between the schools and the research institutions. I mean, New York has a wealth of research institutions. I think we're like number 2 in like getting grants funded, or I mean, like I think there's like 11 top-tier research institutions here. And so what Connect with STEM does is we partner with schools to get more scientists, more STEM professionals into the classroom. Our mission is twofold. First, I and my co-founder want to introduce students to a wide variety of professions, and we also want to introduce them to a diverse group of people doing these professions, because I don't necessarily think everyone should be a scientist, but I do think that when students and children and high school students think about the options that are available to them, I definitely want scientist to be a word that they know.
Excellent. Emmanuel?
So my name is Emmanuel Dumont. I am a scientist at Cornell University in New York City. They just opened a new campus downtown. I work on lupus, which is an autoimmune disease. And actually the immune system doesn't work properly and it starts attacking its own organs. So I do clinical research on lupus, and I have a PhD in biophysics from Columbia University. I was educated in France for my undergrad and before that. And when I arrived at Columbia, I was very struck by the correlation between parents' revenue and populations at Columbia. And I thought it was very bizarre. And so that's why I want to contribute to the debate about STEM education in the US. I think there's a lot to do.
And last but certainly not least, Neal.
Hi, my name is Neal Shenoy. I'm a CEO and co-founder of an ed tech company here in New York called Speakaboos. And we motivate very young kids from pre-K to 3rd grade to read. And we really focus on what we colloquially call the challenge of loving to read. And we think that through our platform, which is a digital storybook service that works on web and mobile and tablet and everything in between, that through our stories and our engagement, we can motivate young children to read, want to read independently, read consistently, and ultimately read more. And that is really, at that young of an age, the pathway to them becoming engaged and interested and ultimately confident in subjects like STEM. And since we're talking to 4-year-olds, the team that's helped to build this wonderful platform has created shows that you all would love as 4-year-olds, including Blue's Clues, which was the first original program on Nickelodeon, Super Y, which was on PBS Kids, as well as having created nickjr.com, one of the top kids video streaming platforms in the country. Very, very passionate team centered around intervention with children at a very, very young age to create a strong foundation for academic excellence.
Excellent. So I'm actually going to stay with Neal for a second because that's my kids, right? I work at a elementary school in the Bronx. It's the poorest congressional school district or the poorest congressional district in the country, where our kids are very, very at risk of not being able to read. And I'm sure you know about the 45 million word gap. Maybe you could say a little bit about how your product and maybe other technologies that you're aware of sort of tries to bridge that gap.
Right. So I think we're seeing a very interesting social change with regards to how we approach education. And that is an emphasis on early childhood and creating strong foundations. New York is emerging as a leader in that with universal pre-K, philosophically speaking. But very similar to what's happening in healthcare on preventative medicine. You know, try to create healthy habits and avoid challenges that make it impossible for young kids to climb out of. So our world is centered on reading. Reading being the gateway to knowledge and, again, academic excellence. And so I'll share some numbers with regards to why that's important, and I'll tell you how we try to affect that impact. What parents don't realize, educators know, is that from birth until age 5, one of the most important things that you can do for their brain development is to read to them or have them read aloud on older ages for at least 15 minutes a day until they're 5 years old. Critically important in terms of vocabulary, conversation, and fulfilling that quote-unquote word gap, also very important in terms of their brain development. Second, again, educators know, parents don't always know. It's not only important, obviously, for children to be reading during school hours, it's equally important for them to be reading during weekends, certainly during summer months. And if a child doesn't read during the summer months, that summer slide causes them to start the new school year having regressed oftentimes a month or two. And think about how much inefficiency that causes in an already sort of short school year. And the third, which I think is the most important and predominantly affects poorer communities and low SES communities, is that if a child does not read at grade level by third grade, that puts them in a hole which is oftentimes impossible to climb out of in terms of meeting their academic ceiling. And the case of low-income communities often results in lower rates of graduation. And whereas we think that's a low-income problem in the States, we do such a poor job of this that 2 out of 3 kids do not read at grade level by third grade. So all that to say, as it relates to STEM, our emphasis is that if you can intervene with children as young as 2, as old as 7, and motivate them to read, and motivate them to be confident, and introduce them to subject matter around math and science, then that interest translates into engagement, that engagement translates into confidence and mastery, and you have 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds that are at least interested in subject matter like science, technology, coding, math, and so on. So we are really starting early to build that foundation. And later in the panel, we can certainly talk about some of the ways that we do that.
Great. I think not just interest, but also without those very key early childhood experiences in reading, they don't have the ability to grasp some of that learning that they could have later on. I wonder, Sabina, you can add something about what you're working on at Teach for America and how that also might impact early reading.
Yeah,
or
I mean, in
learning
terms of ed tech tool out there.
in any way.
Yeah, well, so I mean, I just thought when you mentioned Speakaboo, another one that I'm a huge fan of. Well, first I'll say that tech is never the answer or the solution. It's the educators. They are the answer. But it's a very, very strong means to an end. And anytime I'm evaluating a tech tool, I always ask the question, is the student a passive consumer of this technology? Do they sit at the computer or the iPad and just click on buttons responding to knowledge that was generated elsewhere? And if the answer is yes, then it's not my favorite tool. There's always a place for that kind of tool, but it's a lower level of rigor. So I was going through a demo recently in the last 2 or 3 weeks, and it's a tool. It's not a popular tool. It's not a sexy tool. It's called Bootstrap World. And I'm going through this demo, and the founder is telling me, okay, so this is a tool where you learn algebraic concepts out of programming. So I'm thinking, oh, okay, so you're playing video games to learn algebra. I've seen this before. And then he keeps going through the demo, and then I realized, actually, no, you are creating computer games through algebra. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is the kind of stuff. This is the kind of stuff that we need when you're not a passive consumer, but you're actually generating knowledge. And you're actually, the way I think about it is like, here's the student, here's the computer. Is information going this way, or is it going this way? And that's the number one question I look to when I look for rigor in a tool.
I want to go to Charisse for a second because I think you might be able to tell us a little bit about what some of the challenges are to developing the pipeline to STEM careers for urban students particularly.
So yes, there are a lot of challenges. One, technology is moving faster than government. And when I say that, I mean that it's moving faster than teacher certification, credentials. It's moving faster than curriculum development. It's moving faster than Regents requirements. And so that's one challenge. The other challenge really is that the industry is not getting involved in the public school sector. What we find often is that industry, they will work with specialized high schools. They'll work with schools, not to bash any charter schools, but they'll work with schools who have CMOs behind them, who have the time to develop those relationships and cultivate those partnerships on behalf of the students or that network of schools. But for the average public school who has a work-based learning coordinator that is also a teacher teaching a full load, or a school counselor who's also doing mandated counseling and college advising and everything else, it's very difficult to be able to cultivate those relationships. In the city, we have over 50 career and technical education schools. All of those schools are required to have an industry-based board as a part of their state certification. But I have a number of schools, particularly where students are on the IT or engineering pathways, where those are big gaps. And they're saying they're looking for industry. I have 500 students. I was sharing with someone. I have 500 students based out of the Youth Career Connect grant. I have the money to pay them for internships. I was only able to place 100 of them in internships because companies wouldn't take them. And these are students that are on the that are getting the credential in A+ repair. They're getting the credential in C++ or JavaScript. They're in engineering courses. They're doing all kinds of amazing things. But if you're not from a specialized high school or a school that has a network of other adults that can create those relationships, they're not getting the opportunities. So in short, those are the challenges, but they're more than that as well.
Those are big challenges. And I think, Dr. Stukes, in a lot of ways, what Connect with STEM is trying to sort of ameliorate. Full disclosure, my school is one of the schools that is beginning a partnership with Connect with STEM. And we're really excited about it because we're a small school in the South Bronx, not far from where you got your PhD, but without the resources to really, engage scientists or the knowledge, frankly. And so speak a little bit about what you guys are trying to achieve and how you're doing it.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think for me, what always strikes me is growing up, my parents were very encouraging. I mean, anything I wanted to at least try, they were very supportive of. I mean, I was on the basketball team, and they were just like, look, we'll support you, but I mean, that didn't really work out. But, I think for me, I actually didn't know about graduate school until after I had graduated college. And I think that, not that it was necessarily detrimental to me, and I still was able to go to grad school, but I think that those conversations and that idea should be implemented into kids' minds much earlier on. And so what Connect with STEM is really trying to do, like I said earlier, is just provide awareness of the kinds of people doing STEM professions. I mean, it's very, heartbreaking, I think, is a very dramatic word to use there, but it's just deflating to hear kids who are smart, who are bright, not even know that they could get PhDs, that they could build their own companies, that they, I feel like they have very limited options due to the access of the resources they have. And so, I actually didn't even know that, you can pay companies, and they still are like, I don't know. And so, it seems to be like there's blockade. So now, as you were talking, I was thinking, okay, great. I'm introducing these students to job opportunities, but how do they then get into these jobs? Right. And so I feel like it's almost like a circle, right? They have to know about the jobs to even think about getting the jobs. Mm-hmm. And so that's what we really are trying to do. And like I said, I just think seeing role models. I mean, our logo is "See It, Be It," which I'm sure many of you have heard before. And it's not a end-all to be-all, right? I mean, I actually didn't see any women of color. Well, first of all, women, and then women of color growing up, except until I got to college, doing the science that I wanted to do, and I still somehow managed to do it. But I think that when people have role models, when people have mentors, that can really make all the difference.
Emmanuel, I wonder if you want to say a little bit about what the difference might be between France and sort of your upbringing, and what you see or are aware of in this country in terms of access and those mentorships and pathways.
Yeah, so I've been in the US for 6 years now, and I thought a lot about the role model of scientists, and I thought, the role model of scientists in the US is every Hollywood movie where a catastrophe happens. At the beginning, there's a scientist screwing up, and that's how the movie starts. And I thought, this is really worrisome. I mean, is this how we see scientists? So yeah, I think, in comparison to France, I would say there's much more connection between scientific institutions and lower grade And I think what you are doing is I think, crucial for bridging that gap to say, scientists are also, exploring viruses, explaining things, and it's a passionate endeavor that kids really would get a kick out of it if they knew it existed, I think.
And just to add on to what I was also saying before, it's not also just showing them scientists. It's that we're relatable people. I think that what the kids really get a kick out of too is like, my friends and I will go into the classrooms and we'll talk to them about science, but then I don't know, I'll also be like, yeah, I really like that new Beyonce album. And then they're just like, oh my gosh, you're an actual human being and not this kind of, I think like you said, the scientists in the movies and the scientists on TV, they're on these kind of pedestals. And so how can any child think I could be that when I can't even relate to that person that I'm looking at on the television screen?
That's such a great, that makes me think about some of the really interesting technological advances that I've been aware of recently, like a car that desalinates water, which is being produced in Africa. I mean, how tremendous, right? And I think there's so much about kids and their naivete and their openness that leads them to really be open to those sorts of creations. We lose all that, so, over the years as it gets educated out of us. But if they're not exposed to the fact that they actually can create wonderful things, they certainly won't do it.
Let me add to that too. So I think we're focused on this idea of access, which I think is a huge part of it. I know, like Teach for America, as a recruitment and placement agency at its heart, it's all about diversifying the pipeline, right, of getting people of color into classrooms, and especially into STEM classrooms. I think another piece of that is also being a culturally responsive teacher, and I think there's a lot of nuance in what that means. But the first thing is understanding when you walk into the classroom your own identity, unpacking your own privilege or lack of privilege, because it influences how you see the world and how you see your students, where you set your standard, right? So that's the first piece. I think culturally responsive teaching is also putting your students at the very center of what you're teaching. And I think, that can look like a lot of different things, but when I worked with one of my, a computer science teacher that I work with closely talked about how I was like, what does that actually look like, putting your students at the center of teaching? And he said, okay, well, first you have to recruit the students to take your class. Right? So like students are walking down the hall and when they think, computer science, they're not thinking, black woman. They're not thinking black male. They're not thinking Latino female. They're thinking white guy, right? Maybe Indian guy. But they're not thinking themselves. So that's first, right? So you're like recruiting them. And then once they get into your classroom, understanding what resources they have or don't have at home, right? Can someone at home help them with their homework? Do they have a phone where they can access whatever they're doing? And finally, what are they interested in and what do they want to learn? And the example that he gave me is one of their students. Have you guys seen the movie Inside Out? It's such a silly example, but Inside Out with Pixar, yes, Ken's a fan. But one of his students loved Inside Out and loved Pixar. So he found resources where you could understand the concepts of STEM used in Pixar films. So now you're connecting, what you're teaching, your content is grounded in what your students are interested in. So I do think it's certainly about access, right, and internships and things like that. But even when they're in the classroom, having a person of color teaching their classroom, I think is a huge deal. So then they're like, oh, I can see myself doing that. Like you are just an incredible example, right? Like, let's be honest. When we see you, do we think, oh my gosh, you're in STEM? No, but we should. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think this happened to me. So I'm 32, and I've been doing research for over a decade. And I cannot tell you, this actually happened to me yesterday, the amount of times I'll introduce myself and someone will say, oh, and then, we're in New York, so everyone's always like, what do you do? And so when I say I'm a scientist, immediately it's, oh, but you don't look like a scientist. And that's not a compliment at all. I know what you're saying. Like I understand the idea behind it, but to me, I think, and one of the things that I've actively tried to do is instead of getting people to say, "Oh, you don't look like a scientist," it should be like, "Oh, that's awesome. What do you work on?" Or can you talk to me a little bit more about that? because what that means to me is you have a very narrow view of what a scientist is. And so it's not just students where we have to get them to change it of what their concept of a scientist is. It's also media and society at large.
And I would just argue that's why it's so important that industry gets involved in the classroom and gets involved in schools.
We can see them, right?
Right. You know, when I talk to CTE teachers or I'm talking to principals, you know, I have to remind them, I say, coding is a language, but you've still got to develop your content expertise. You know, it's RPI, for example, now requires, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute requires that all students who are going to major in computer science also have to major in something else, because they're explicitly saying coding is a language, computer science is a language. Now,
Like
it's a foreign language. Yeah. And I think that that's what we have to teach students. Like, I just learned recently, digital sculpting is a thing. Who knew? You know, and so I could have a student who's interested in art and can be involved in the tech sector. We're talking a lot about young women are completely underrepresented in the STEM fields, particularly in IT, particularly in engineering. If what they're interested in is art, then you teach them. You can be a digital sculptor. You can do graphic design. You can create logos, and those, there's a lot of, I forgot what they call it, but it's like sensory, a lot of like PLC, I can't remember what it stands for. But there's a coding language that happens that makes the advertisements change. That's coding. That's programming. And that a lot of girls actually, when they see it, they're like, oh, I like that. Okay, I can switch that up. Okay, I'm making what I wanted to do. That's good, I can do that. But someone's gotta be able to articulate that for them. And I'm sorry, but like schools can't do it. They're overburdened, and they need industry to be involved, and they need them to pay attention. I have a school right here on 123rd. If anybody ever wants to come visit, it's Columbia Secondary School. They have, not only do they have a 6 through 12 engineering curriculum, but they have a 6 through 12 philosophy curriculum as well. And they are playing, you know, humanities and STEM are equally important. I have 2 schools in the Bronx, not too far away if you want to see them. High School for Computers and Technology, and then INSEC Academy. These are schools doing really amazing things, but they need industry.
I think that's a really great point. And one of the questions I had shared with you guys was this question of, does everybody need to code? There's such an interest right now in coding, and girls who code, and you know, short people who code, tall people who code. It's like everybody's got to code. Everybody codes. And yet I think, you know, Jack Ma, the head of Alibaba, said something about how, you know, Chinese are not, you know, as a country, that they're not wonderful at innovation, because while they teach those basics really well, they're not so good at the liberal arts, which America has had as very much as a basis for ourselves. So I asked the panel, how important is coding, and do we need to, you know, just, is it the panacea, I guess, that people seem to think?
I wrote for number 3, I wrote no.
Great, thank you so much for that.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, what you were saying earlier, so I took a coding class once, and I would say, like, I'm conversational HTML. Like, I mean, if I saw it, I could, I guess, read it. But I don't really know how to code, and I think that, you know, like Steve Jobs didn't know how to code, and I think he did pretty well for himself. Exactly. So, but I think that, you know, you're right with that he also was really good with design, and so, like, that's what made him very good. And so I think that it's not that you necessarily need to code. I think it's we should be encouraging kids to figure out what they actually want to be doing and seeing if coding can help that.
Exactly.
So it's not the end, it's the means to an end.
Yeah, I mean, and I do agree that, yeah, I mean, it's just like any language. It's good to know some of the terms and the basics of it, but I don't think that, you know, if you learn how to code, and yes, you can get a good job and it pays well, but maybe that's not the job you want.
Right. I think that, no, everyone does not need to know how to code.
Because I don't.
Thank you.
Let's just say.
No. I think that, I will say though, I think that it's important to have, for students, I don't think that we need it as much, but I think that for current high school students and for students younger than them, they need to know the difference between languages. So they need to know the difference between Java, C++. They need to know when Scratch is applicable. They may need to know a little bit of Ruby on Rails. I've learned so much in this job, right? I'm like, I know what I'm talking about now. You know, and so they need to know how to use those things.
Or what
But-
thing they might need to use to do a specific thing.
Exactly. But they also need to know that I don't have to be the engineer. I can be the project manager. I can be the communications person. There are so many other roles. And so particularly for students who may not be as strong in math or in science, who may struggle with calculus, but want to get involved in STEM, there are a range of other positions that students can get involved in, and they can lift themselves into self-sufficiency, which is the goal of Youth Career Connect. USDOL says that the purpose of this grant, there are 24 grantees across the country, and the whole purpose is to raise students into self-sufficiency and lift them out of poverty. That's it. So if I can get my PMP and be a project manager at a tech firm or at an architecture firm, I'm still making a salary that's going to give me a living wage and have me live a more comfortable life than I was living before. But students need to know that, and they need to know that that's an option.
So Neal, I would turn it to you as an entrepreneur. I'm interested in the different sorts of roles your company employs people
Yeah,
in.
so I'll take a slightly nuanced view. So I think there's very few things in life that you need to do, right? I mean, I went to school, undergrad, at the Foreign Service School at Georgetown, which I loved it. Literally nothing to do with, no applicability to what I'm doing in terms of my job as a media, entertainment, education sort of entrepreneur. But I think that the reason that I would heavily promote coding as a means to an end is because, like language and like any education, it is a framework for thinking. It develops a certain sense of fluency, which I think is superbly valuable. And so that, as a skill set, I think is exceptionally valuable. But the two things I would agree with is that, number one, coding or computer science married with something else is really important, right? So if I had to do all over again, I would have been I don't code, a comp sci major, but marrying that with philosophy or psychology. I think that would have been fascinating, right? In terms of frameworks and structures for thinking. But to be pragmatic, if I look at, we started 4 companies under our umbrella, which is called 212 Media, 212 obviously being our area code here. And we employ about 300 people across those 4 businesses. And it is the hardest positions to recruit for are obviously engineers. And so what I love about engineering and coding in general is, presuming it's something that you want to do, you are automatically putting yourself in a high skill position. I will guarantee you that you'll over-index in terms of your desire from an employment perspective and from a salary perspective as well. It is one of the most merit-based professions. It does not matter how you look, who you look like. You could be a misanthrope. You could sit in a country. I mean, the rules that we bend for our engineers, because they're phenomenal engineers. You know, we have engineers in the Ukraine, in parts of Georgia I've never visited, in Texas. Everyone else is in our office in New York, because we literally cannot find enough engineers. So what I would say, again, to be nuanced, is that I would strongly, strongly encourage people to code. I would marry that with something else that's very interesting to them. I do view that as a means to an end, but I think it has a profound opportunity to be able to lift people out of maybe what's a glass ceiling in terms of what their potential is. And you know, you're going to amplify your shot at really doing well if you know coding. Doesn't have to be the end-all, be-all. Very few things in life are like that. But if you had to bet on one thing, I would say coding would be a good thing to bet on.
We have about 5 minutes, and so I want to open it to the audience to see if there are any questions for our esteemed panel. Yes?
So I think coding is what people jump to because people who don't know about tech, IT, STEM are like, oh, coding, it's in the news, coding. Because it's something they don't know the languages that you're speaking, Java versus this versus that. They're not going to get into that level of detail. So as someone who trains adults in New York City in vocational and academic areas, what else would you train people in other than coding? What
Data
would you,
science.
Yeah.
so we're
Statistics.
Statistics is huge.
Statistics, yeah.
you can, so I'm going to give a little more background. Okay. I'm the director of academic affairs at an adult ed center here in Harlem, and our eligibility requirements are you cannot have a college degree. High school diploma only. What are you getting a job in New York City? In IT. Silence.
Cybersecurity.
Right? The room was silent though.
Unless
The
you
first
take
time
the
room was
course.
silent. Everyone's thinking, oh, what are we going to train people in, right? So
Right.
there are hundreds of thousands of people. Business operations. Now we're thinking.
www.eureup.org.
Oh, Europe, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm aware.
There's kind of 6 different disciplines that they teach that high school only diplomas, 6 months of training.
We should talk afterwards unless
Yeah.
someone else have a question.
I think I saw a question here.
Europe
Do you
is
have
a
question?
solid resource.
Yes.
I endorse that.
I just want to bring up a point in, dealing with young children and getting them through these, developing interest in getting them what I call their locus stuff. I have a son that's in school in North Carolina, and I remember him starting and realizing he had a certain different talent. Fifth grade, he was already taking kind of advanced type science and math and that kind of stuff. By the time he was in the 6th grade, he had moved on, and he started getting into athletics and all this stuff. So still got to do.
Can I move you to your question? I'm sorry.
Hear me out.
Okay.
I want to get to it.
Okay.
So we got to the point where, and I'm talking specifically to the level of students in schools. But they got to get to a point where they either lose interest or it's hard or they kind of go with their peers and do other things. Easier. And so I guess my point here is that's where, that matchup with industry and mentors and the folks who's going to encourage them to move along. I remember the day my son told me, he said, I want to go into business and get out of this stuff, and science, chemistry and all this other stuff. I said, now that he's out of it, he's really happy because of all of his friends that are in the program that he's in, are all got internships and they're jobs,
So help me clarify a question. So you want to know what are some strategies to help students endure?
Keep them in.
Okay.
pressure and just coming in puberty and girls and boys or whatever the case may be, where, it starts to, cause kids to grow in other directions.
So how to keep them focused on that path.
So I think if we're talking about K through, specifically 9 through 12 is my population. So if we're talking 9 through 12, I think it's important to, at every iteration, introduce them to people who look like them at every level. So I think it's important for juniors and seniors, even freshman students, to see college students that are majoring in STEM, who are majoring in information systems or engineering. It's important for those conversations to happen where a student can say, I have calculus and I hate it, but I'm doing it. I think when you're talking about, in colleges, there's NSBE, there are all these other organizations for students of color who are going through this process together, right? As a people, African Americans, there's research that shows that we do better when we study together. And so the same rules apply in IT, the same rules apply in engineering. And those are very collaborative disciplines to begin with. So we have to encourage that at every grade level for our students. We have to keep connecting them to people. I have a nephew who's 3 right now, and I already see that he has the aptitude for engineering. So I have things that I let him break. And I watch him as he tries to put them together. And then he has another cousin, girl, likes to break things. I let them break things together. And I watch what they do and see how they put it together, right? So that's important, one, because I want them to know that it's okay to break things. Not everything, but there's some things that you can break, right? But it's also important that they have each other, and they say, oh, I like to break things, and she likes to break things. So we can do that together. And my goal and my hope is that they'll continue to encounter people like them. And as an aunt and as a cousin and as a sister, I will continue to put them in environments where they're interacting with other people who like the same things that they do. So, there are things that schools and teachers can do in terms of teaching the content, but there's a lot of socio-emotional stress that happens in learning STEM. And so those things have to be addressed as well.
So we have
And
about
just
5 more minutes. But yes.
2 seconds is
yeah.
yes, there's absolutely no way that I would have gotten my PhD if I didn't create a network create a network for myself within my school. I always say keep your tribe tight,
Yes.
because you're going to need that for the rest of your life. I mean, there were many times when even in high school, in college, more so in grad school, where I had to say to myself, is this for me? Am I good enough for this? And that's when, instead of looking in the mirror, I had to turn to my girls who were going through the program with me and say, what's really going on? Is this all in my head? Like, what's happening? And so I think for your son, I think make sure he is surrounding himself with people who are supporting him, who are being honest, and who are encouraging him, every step of the way.
That's really great advice. I think we have a
Oh, I'm
couple
not
more
sure you're
questions,
not
and
yet.
I'm
We can talk.
running out of time. You, and then you, and then the one in the back. Yes, please, quickly.
So the first thing is just a little blurb. My son is interested in football also, and I'm encouraging him to major or minor in math because I found the whole thing of statistics, and so he's interested in that now. But my question is about the students that you weren't able to place in businesses. Are entrepreneurs and small businesses eligible?
Yes, you're eligible. As long as the student won't be placed in your home, there's an actual office space, you can take them.
Okay, so just contact me.
Come get my card at the end.
Yes.
I run an after-school program. I'm actually a journalist who decided to start a hands-on engineering class.
You were one of those people who raised your hand several times when I asked.
And basically because I think that the future is technology and engineering. So the question I have is that we did a program in the spring that was pretty successful with high school students. Parents were telling me, wow, kids really love this hands-on approach and can't wait to get to class. And basically what we do is we have them do like demonstration projects, wind turbines, solar cars, and teach them the math and the physics that go along. I don't do it personally. I've hired a PhD in mathematician. But here's the issue. We tried to do it over the summer with junior high school students. Oh my God. It's like the energy level and the short attention span was crazy. But here's the dilemma. I found that it's easier to mold or direct a junior high school student into math and sciences because they are not set in their ways. But trying to deal with attention span and energy is
Right.
Obviously I need somebody smarter than I
Right.
to figure that out. So if you have any suggestions.
I do have some
I'm
ideas.
starting a program on Thursday and I'm going to
Oh, wow. You've given up on middle school altogether?
I need some help.
Yeah, well, we should talk afterwards,
Definitely, yeah.
for sure. I think I have time for one more question. The woman on the right, I saw your hand first. I'm sorry.
Hi, my name is Nikkei Piper. I'm a tech entrepreneur and investor. I launched an e-learning platform 3 years ago. We're in beta, and my first enterprise was in college. I want to speak to the point that the panel is trying to make. This young woman asked, hi,
Cybersecurity, I heard.
teach people. I don't code. I am conversational in HTML.
I'm going to make that a thing.
And I found a way. I get it. It's not my forte. Have no interest in it. I'm the entrepreneur. And there's so much value being placed on coding that the everything that goes into the site, the UX design, the user experience, the beta, right? The project management, the marketing know-how, all of that is kind of pushed aside. And there are ways, right? Cybersecurity, IT, cybersecurity, huge. Companies pay people $250,000 to come in, crack the That's something that we're not hearing a lot about. So I encourage you to not, coding is excellent, and I'm not the coding naysayer. It's a component that goes into the grand scheme of things, and we need everyone to make this engine run. So just do some research on, the things that go into the app development. Even the mobile ads, are they interested in advertising, that type of thing, is the point.
So we're out of time. I'm just coming to pull me off. I just want to thank our panel for being here. It was a wonderful panel. Thank you all. And thank you all.